All right, Alexander, let's answer the questions from the live stream with Robert Barnes. And let's start off with Rolf Peterson, who says, "Sweet and low for your coffee on me. Thanks for your work." Thank you for that, Ralph. Commando Crossfire says, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist." Thank you, Valies, for that super chat. Darlene says, "Do we really have to wait 2 hours? Thanks, guys. You're the goats." Thank you very much for that, Darlene. WT says, "No questions. Been watching the Duran since 2021. Truly the best duo, Alex and Alexander." Thank you, WT. Don F says, "Good, good." Philip J says, "Duran, the daily injection of knowledge." Thank you for that, Philip. And Mark Hewitt says, "What significance did you give to Trump's statement about fighting rhinos and staring at Lindsey Graham when making the comment?" Robert can't answer this question.
No, I think he did actually, and I don't really know that there's very much more that I can say, because fundamentally I agree with him. I mean, he explained very carefully what Lindsey Graham's importance was, that it solidifies Trump's position in, I think it was South Carolina. And, you know, that Trump is up against Nikki Haley, possibly. Well, I mean, I think inevitably. She was the governor. She comes from there. So he wants Lindsey Graham's support in South Carolina. I think that's the whole explanation for this. Lindsey Graham, I think, is angling for some position. I have to say this. I mean, either, in the Senate, he wants to be pushed up somehow in the hierarchy of the Senate, or if there's a new Trump administration, he wants to maybe be Secretary of State or something of that kind. So each of these two people is using the other. I think there are risks for Trump in getting so close to Lindsey Graham, to be honest. But I think, on balance, Trump knows what he's doing.
From Time Smith, great to see Barnes on again. Enderoid says, "Thanks for the quality conversation." And First Lord Advar says, "Good, good." And Red Viking says, "Danish intelligence has confirmed Putin got wrong medication. That's why Russia invaded Ukraine."
That's the answer to the whole mystery then. No, that's all I can say. I mean, presumably he's still on the same medication, because he still seems to be persisting in this policy. So clearly this medication is very effective.
Timur says, "You two shadow banned me for my last comment related to the FBI having possession of the laptop since 2019. The IC disseminated false information about the Russians on the eve of the election."
Well, I'm sure we didn't shadow ban you at all. Whoever did, it wasn't us. So innocent on that.
YouTube shadow banned, it says.
I see. Okay, right. But anyway, regardless, I mean, the facts about the laptop are now out in the open. We all know that Hunter himself has said it's his. So the whole attempt to try and, conceal that it was his, the entire suppression of the story that took place, the extraordinary letter from the former intelligence officials saying that it was a Russian disinformation exercise, that's all collapsed. And over and beyond that, I would remind you that some months ago with Larry Johnson, we did a program on the Duran in which we interviewed the person, the repairman who received that laptop. You go back, look at our old videos, you'll find it a most revealing program. We set out the full facts of it there.
McIsaac, right?
McIsaac, absolutely, McIsaac. Yeah, sorry, did I not mention his name? McIsaac, absolutely.
No. I think yeah. That was a fantastic show.
It was.
From Uranus says, "Thank you for all your sober perspectives. I should really pay you guys much more." From Bitcoin Crypto says, "What's up?" And from Euro Gabor, "I am not a conservative. I am pro-American, John Bolton." Any take on this, gentleman, preferably without puking yellow?
Well, he's not pro-American. He's pro-Neocon. He's got his own vision of what America should be, and that may not be one that most Americans share. But the most important thing is, notice that he admits that he's not a conservative. Neocons are not conservatives, not in any true sense. They are a radical revolutionary movement which wants to involve the United States in a program of export of their concept of revolution right around the world. So they are not conservatives. They are the opposite of conservatives. It's a point we've made many times before in the past, perhaps not recently, but we have made it before. And here we have no less a person than Bolton coming forward and admitting to the fact.
Ricardo Afonso says Jordan Peterson is a grifter. He uses his credentials to push the opinions of who pays him, i.e. BITCHUTE.
I don't agree with this. I think that's too hard on Jordan Peterson. I mean, frankly, he's taken some very, very radical and difficult positions. He's come in for an awful lot of abuse and criticism. I think he'd have had a much easier life and a more financially rewarding life if he'd not taken those positions. So I don't agree with that. But, as Robert discussed, he gets some things horribly wrong. And he does have a habit sometimes of going with the flow. And I'm afraid he has on these latest topics that we've discussed, Ukraine and such things.
From Bob Anderson, Robert, you look like you've lost weight. I'm very pleased. Your voice is needed. Here's to a long life and good health.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know whether he has, but long life and good health to Robert, absolutely.
Long life and good health, yeah. Sambut415 says, stay awesome, brothers. Elena, thank you for that super sticker. Elena, thank you for that super chat. Carlos, thank you for that super sticker. And Filipina Traveler TV, thank you for that super sticker. It's a good channel, Filipina Traveler TV. Alexander, it is a good YouTube channel. Sanjeva says, good day to you, Mr. Barnes. Do you think the Freedom Caucus, given there is so much media antagonism, I understand that there is popular support, but will that be enough?
Well, this is the big question. And I don't think Robert can answer that definitively, and nor can we. The point is, there is an awful lot of support. That support appears to be growing. The fact that the Republicans didn't do as well as all of us expected in the midterms doesn't appear to have affected the Freedom Caucus's position at all. On the contrary, it seems to be stronger as a result of that disappointing result than might otherwise have been the case. And that's been very, very interesting. And over time, my own personal view is that power within the Republican Party will flow to them. And as it flows to them, you will start to see more outlets starting to express and articulate and inform people of their views. But whether it will be enough, only time can tell.
Vladimir, thank you for that super sticker. Mdu Sibanda, thank you for that super sticker. Kickjack says, JP, not a grifter, being used, full stop.
Yeah, I agree.
Ricardo Alfonso says, a lot of manosphere commentators also push the mainstream Ukraine narrative from the moment that demonizes them as well.
Absolutely. Can I just say, at least in the United States, you have some people who have withstood it within, independent media. I'm sorry to say that in Britain, where, of course, independent media is only a pale shadow of what it is in the United States, but here in Britain, they've all gone along with the mainstream narrative. All of the big outlets, that used to be holding out against this thing, the Canary, all of those. I think only the Off Guardian has stood firm.
From Zariel JBP, Jordan Peterson, is like Dr. McCullough. He needs to hear facts from another source to really understand. Geopolitics is not his field. We should change that.
I agree. Totally. I think that's entirely correct.
Jetset.1 says, Robert, could Jordan P.'s stance have to do with government threats that he needs re-education?
I don't know. I mean, how do we know? The fact is he is under constant pressure. And somebody who is under constant pressure, it's not surprising if sometimes on a topic he doesn't fully know, if he says, well, I'm not going to fight on this one. I'm going to go along with the mainstream and perhaps accept the mainstream, because you can't fight all the time. At least that's the view some people take.
Jetset.1 says, Robert, your view on Andrew Tate's arrest in Romania.
I think he discussed this in enormous length and very brilliantly, if I may say.
Jordy, thank you for that super chat. Sanjeva says, correction to earlier question. Will the Freedom Caucus have a future, given the media antagonism?
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. I think we just said yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we did. Tyler Durden says, Ukraine has just shown that the emperor has no clothes, economically and militarily. Who's paying the price for this disaster at the neocons?
Well, first of all, Ukraine is paying the price. I mean, never forget that. Ukraine is being destroyed with every day that passes. Tens of thousands of people die. More of the economy is destroyed. Millions of people leave. It's in a terrible place. And that's the first thing to say. But who else pays the price? All of us are paying the price. Those of us who have to pay higher food bills, higher energy bills, those of us who have to pay higher child costs. Britain, by the way, they're the most expensive now, I believe, in the world, which is saying something. So all of us are paying the price. Russians are paying the price. Perhaps in Beijing, they may be looking at this and saying this is working to our advantage. The United States has become distracted in Ukraine, sending all of its best equipment there. It's no longer really focused on us as it perhaps would have been alternatively. But generally speaking, most of the world is paying the price.
Sad Ferret, thank you for that super sticker. Rema Suvanto, thank you for that super sticker. Yaroslav Zaruba says, should JBP start making sense on Ukraine, Russia, he would lose most of his audience on all his topics. Do we want that?
Well, that's also true. Can I just say something? I'm not familiar with the opinions of much of JBP's audience. So, you may very well be right. I mean, what he could do is, I suppose, keep off this topic. And maybe that's what he does.
Yeah.
I would just make one observation there. One particular person showed the courage to go against the mainstream orthodoxy of his day, even though he was warned, if you do that, you will sacrifice your political position and see your political movement in the United States destroyed. That was Martin Luther King. He opposed the Vietnam War. He was told, if you do that, if you set yourself against the Democrat administration of the day, you will lose the support of the Democrats, you will lose the support of the administration, you will turn patriotic Americans against you. And Dr. King said, this is nonetheless, this war is wrong, I can't remain silent. He came out and opposed it long before most other people did, at least on the left. There were always more critics, by the way, at the beginning on the right than there were on the left. He had the courage to do that. And of course, in the end, he proved right. And it didn't, in fact, have the effect on his movement that many people thought it would.
From Euro Gabor, Andrew Tate made a big mistake when he bought his air ticket instead of flying to Bucharest, he should have flown to Budapest. Orban could have organized an international conference for him out of spite.
I think we would agree with that. But, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Or foresight sometimes
Tenebris. Tenebris says Russia's Syria intervention really disrupted Israel's war against Assad.
True. Not just Israel's, of course. I mean, the US, Britain's even more, Saudi Arabia's too. They were all involved, and they all failed.
Don F. says Omar gets the boot. Outstanding. Thank you for that, Don F. Julian Palmer says Peterson has controlled opposition, converged, captured to keep young men away from right-wing ideas and values. See Vox Day's book, Jordanetics.
Yeah, look, I'm not an expert on Jordan Peterson. I mean, I don't know everything about him, and that may very well be right. I don't personally think he's controlled opposition. As I said, the amount of abuse this man has come under is just off the scale. I mean, he's somebody the British media love to hate, for example, and I don't believe that somebody, intentionally brings that on himself. But, that he's not opposition on every subject. Well, Robert has discussed that at length, and I really don't have much to add there.
From Abdi, keep up the great work, guys. Thank you for that, Abdi. From KS, thank you for that super sticker. Darlene, Namoch, thank you for that super sticker. JV says, great comment on being careful when you get info from people in power.
Absolutely. I mean, again, let me repeat again. I mean, there's some people whom I would trust with this sort of thing. I mean, the late Robert Parry, if he spoke to people in power, I would have confidence that he would not be manipulated. I, myself, don't feel that I have the experience, the background, the knowledge to be able to do that. Robert can do it. I mean, he's shown in the past that he has the ability to talk to people with power, and he's able to communicate and things of that kind. I don't have that. And for that reason, I keep very clear of those sort of people. It's a well-known fact, for example, that I am on friendly terms with the former British Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, but I've never discussed the political side of what he does with him.
From Kickjack Barnes, please connect the Duran with Sargon's The Lotus Eaters. It'd be great to see Alexander in their studio in Wales. Alex is too far to drive. Thank you for that, Kickjack.
It's a thought.
Tomatom, 7... Yeah, Sargon would be a very cool show. Tomatom 73 says, the left is fond of using the slogan, telling the truth to power, but it doesn't realize they are only serving that power.
Absolutely, that's completely correct. And I mean, to be honest, I don't think they do tell the truth to power. I think that they do quite the opposite.
Mark Hewitt says, I would love to hear Robert's view on the recent Tucker Carlson opinion on Bob Woodward and Watergate.
Yeah, I think I would be too, actually. I should say one of my, I lived through Watergate as a child. I was not a child, a teenager, and I was very, very, swept along with the whole story about Watergate as it was described, that Nixon was this evil, terrible person who had been exposed by the media. I've become so much more skeptical about it since. I've really come around to the view that the reason they targeted Nixon was because of a lot of the things that he was doing in foreign policy.
From Andrew, I noticed DW was milquetoast when the coup started. Elections confirmed they wouldn't stand on anything I cared about. Now they're acting like they've always been non-compliant, and it's disgusting.
Okay, right.
DW, I believe, is the Daily Wire, I believe.
Yeah, I believe you. Yeah. So, no, I'm not
Daily
surprised.
Wire.
I mean, I'm not surprised.
Publication, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Dark Matter Falls 101 says, having just viewed some of Jordan's interviews on climate science, in which they completely debunk the MSGN, mainstream government narrative, no one man has total domain on the truth.
Absolutely true. Yeah. I'm not a huge. I don't. I don't know all there is to say about Jordan Peterson. I understand why on some things he's wrong. All of us are. We all have our blind spots. Ukraine happens to be his.
Kimberly Mimes, speaking about independence, what do you think happened to the independent John Magufuli in Tanzania and U.S. coercive diplomacy in DRC and Zambia?
I can't say. This is something that is, I'm afraid, out of my immediate range of knowledge. I'd have to spend time researching this because I need to know an awful lot more about this to be able to comment on it with any degree of, knowledge of what I'm saying.
Orlando Santos, thank you for that super sticker. Summer of 1970 says, no trust, no peace. Sanjeva says, despite Jordan getting geopolitics wrong, his fights with registration boards overstepping their role will have far-reaching consequences, especially for medical professionals like us, even in Australia.
Well, there you go. I mean, Jordan Peterson, we have this expression in Britain that's, a curate's egg, good in some things, maybe less good in others. He's a human being. He's under an awful lot of pressure all the time. He fights important battles. He wins some of these battles. Perhaps he says to himself, I can't fight every battle. And, psychologically, maybe he says to himself, I'm not going to fight this one. Maybe I'm just not going to look behind the mainstream media narrative because, I can't take on that extra battle as well.
Bass player 211 Iffy says, if I recall correctly, the government and the Biden administration in particular stopped giving grants to Tesla after Musk started criticizing Biden.
That's an interesting one. You may be right. I haven't followed this very precisely, actually, but the whole Musk affair is very interesting. I don't know whether you've heard anything about this, Alex.
Yeah, it's hard to say why Musk does what he does.
No, it is, isn't it?
There's an angle. That's all I know is that he has an angle. They always have an angle.
They always have an angle.
Yeah, exactly. Kit Jack says, can we get Alex to fly to Lotus Eater Studios if we also set up a live discussion debate between the Duran and Constantine and Francis of trigonometry?
Okay, I have. This is
trigonometry.
I don't know this particular channel. I could pretend I know all of them, but who knows?
Peter 618, thank you for the super sticker. Medea, thank you for that super sticker. Cactus Ray, thank you for that super sticker. Ricardo Alfonso says the downside is that the truth becomes vitiated in the wake of all the grifters' commentaries. Ultimately, people may come to believe nothing. And is that the point in the end? Just accept anything?
Well, what you're describing is a little bit like what eventually happened towards the end of the Soviet Union, where people were became so cynical about the propaganda that they were constantly being exposed to, that they simply became very, very cynical about absolutely everything. And that continued well past the time of the end of the Soviet Union. If you went to Russia circa 1995, for example, 98, I was there in 98, the levels of cynicism that you encountered about absolutely everything were just off the scale. So yes, I can see how that might happen. I don't think we're there yet, but I can see how in time that might happen.
From Russell Hall, they're already tying Musk to Epstein.
Okay.
I didn't know that. Ricardo Alfonso, Haley looks like and LOTR Goblin, just saying.
Okay, I'm not going to comment on that one. All I will say about her is, I mean, she's certainly not someone I want to see win, but I can't believe that she would, actually.
Ricardo Alfonso says the Tate brothers didn't take their own advice. They should have left Romania after the first arrest. They couldn't resist the ladies.
Quite possibly, I mean. Yeah.
Perhaps. Kickjack says, one more reason to bribe Alex to get out to the UK for such things. Lots of in-person videos with both Alexes. Those were great watching last time.
Absolutely, but there's always the option of my going to Greece, which is perhaps a more practical one in the short term, and very likely, I would add.
Sanjeva says, whether Nikki Haley or Bobby Jindal or Harris or Rishi Sunak, none of us in South Asian diaspora support these people. Voting along ethnic lines for us ended a decade ago. It's frankly embarrassing that the worst of us get into high positions in politics.
Well said. I mean, I've got nothing to add to that. I mean, we should never vote for ethnic lines. I mean, to give you an example, when Michael Dukakis was the presidential candidate way back in the 80s, I mean, I didn't think much of him, to be honest. And I would certainly not have voted for him merely because he was a Greek American if I'd had a vote in that election, which of course I didn't.
Jackie Ridley, thank you for that awesome super sticker. Last Pagan says, hi, gents. Thanks for all the sane work you're doing in these times of insanity. Definitely my #1 news channel. Keep it up, guys. Thank you for that. Trenton Paul says, who will the Dems run?
Good question. I don't know. I'm not sure they do themselves. Pete Buttigieg, eventually, who knows? But of course, they have the Kamala problem. So we'll see what they do about that.
Yeah. Dark Matter Falls 101 says, will Hillary Clinton make a comeback?
Did she ever go away?
I think she's ruled that out.
Yeah, I think she.
I think she's. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Lema Lisovska says, can you imagine Trump with Tulsi Gabbard as VP?
I can imagine it, but I don't think it's going to happen. But I can imagine it. I'm not sure how practical politically it is.
Island Popsicle says, I fear the talk about legal abuse is wasted. The people who abuse systems don't care about legality. They're driven by a twisted ideology. If we want real change, we have to revert to a culture of integrity, honor, and faith.
I don't think it's wasted because, of course, if we don't talk about these things, then, of course, it becomes completely accepted and normalized, and the rule of law, such as it is, collapses completely. So I don't think it's wasted. I think we have to talk about these things, and we have to point out the fact that we are departing ever further from the rule of law, and how contrary not just to our traditions in the West, but also to the foundations of our political systems, even our pre-democratic political systems in, say, Britain, this is and how dangerous it is. But about your cynicism about the whole situation, I am completely agreement.
Commander Crossfire says, Jimmy Dore was absolutely amazing on Tucker Carlson. The man is a true hero of journalism and integrity. We need more like him in the media.
I am a great admirer of Jimmy Dore, and I agree with that, yeah.
John Zucchero says, Robert, with the RNC, with Mr. Magoo, Rana, can we start a third party? Tired of losing on purpose. MAGA is the way. Alex, Alexander, and Robert, and Viva, my brother Raymond and I love your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. About setting up third parties. Never, ever underestimate how difficult that is to do, both in the United States and Britain. I think for the moment, I think it would be unwise for the MAGA movement to withdraw and to set itself apart from the Republican Party. The Republican Party is still there. They still have a powerful presence in it, maybe an increasingly powerful presence in it. So I wouldn't give up on it now. I think, doing so at this point would be a political error.
Lilia says the West observed human rights, including freedom of expression, when the socialist system existed. After its collapse, the West had no motivation to respect human rights, and it showed its real face.
So many people in the Eastern Bloc, the former Eastern Bloc in Russia, make that precise point, that the very fact of the Soviet Union's existence and the fact that it did things differently meant that in the West there was a desire to sort of distinguish themselves, the West, from the Soviet Union. And that meant that people were much more careful to preserve rule of law and to exercise those kind of things. I think that is true up to a very great point. But I would say this, in reality, if you look at the United States, if you look at Britain, I think that the peak period, if you like, for observance of rule of law, observance of due process, was actually the period prior to, the first half of the 20th century, actually. And I think we've ever so gradually been moving away from that. And that started to some extent during the Cold War, though not to anything like the extent we see now. Since the Cold War ended, it's been, and the Neocons basically took over, it's been an absolute disaster.
Robert Ninick says, could Israel detach themselves from the U.S.? Imagine Russia continuing their initiative to mediate in the Middle East. Is it possible that Israel and neighbors can reach an agreement via Russia?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm not predicting it's going to happen, but anybody who thinks that Israel it has, gambled everything, its entire, policy for the indefinite future on the United States is simply wrong. I think the Israelis are very, very conscious of their own interests, and if the Russians are the big game in town, they will work with them. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I have no doubt about that at all.
From Dark Matter Falls, can we expect a new leader for the SMP soon? How can the NS come back from putting rapists in women's prison? The whole thing is just folly.
This is presumably, you're talking about Scotland now. I don't know. At the moment, yes, Sturgeon looks pretty secure, I would say, as SNP leader. So maybe a little less secure than she did a few months ago, but I think overall she's seen off the challenge from Alex Salmond. That I could say a lot more about that, but I'm not going to at this point because that would take up too much time. But she's seen off Alex Salmond. She's consolidated her control of the SNP. She's very much in control of the levers in Scotland. I think that what might change that is if the SNP has a disappointing result in the next British parliamentary election, and that is possible. But for the moment, I think she's in a reasonably strong position.
From Yaroslav Barnes, your reaction to JBP's announcement of a WEF alternative in terms of the future world narrative?
Well, I mean, again, lots to say. I mean, I don't want. I'll speak for myself here. I don't want an alternative. I want an end. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, I don't want setting up alternatives. I just want, I just think that we should just leave things to sort themselves out. And I don't think we need people going out and organising our reality and telling us what we should do and what you shouldn't do and things of that sort. That's my own personal view.
Jake says, Barnes, you might be interested to know, as a Minnesotan, I actually don't think it needs to exist as a state anymore. Just wanted to share.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, this is an American thing, which I'm not going to comment on.
Tom Bobadil says, here's the new chant, no blood for billionaires.
Crumbs. Good one.
Johan, thank you for that. Johan, thank you for that super chat. Pasha Moyer says, at Robert Barnes, have you invited Alex and Alexander to the LV meetup yet? Here's hoping you do. Las
Well,
Vegas meetup.
it's possible, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a good chance that I may be visiting Vegas myself at some point on a completely unrelated private matter. In which case, I will certainly be meeting up with Robert. But that's possible. I mean, and of course, there's always a chance we could all end up there. Bear in mind that I know no part of the United States apart from New York. Alex, of course, has travelled extensively around the US.
Not a banned account says, what is Russia's stance on the vax mandates? Will President Trump face prosecution for bypassing vax testing against Dr. Fauci's advice?
Well, on the one hand, the Russians strongly promoted their vax, what was it? I can't remember what its name was, Sputnik V or whatever it was. So they promoted it, but they never enforced it, never to the extent that it happened in the US. And I think I can say for a fact that take-up has been much lower in Russia than in the West. By the way, that's also true in China too.
Tony Neves says, Robert, can someone please advise Trump to go to some Black inner cities to speak to people? Do that early and often. It'll definitely help.
I think he will.
To people and to do that early and often.
I seem to remember that he's done that before, and I think he probably will do it again. I mean, it's the kind of thing he'd be interested in doing. By the way, remember, one of the things that caused the biggest anger within the political establishment in Washington was when he talked in his inaugural address about the catastrophic situation, law and order situation in some US cities. And I think, he probably is aware of these things and conscious of these things and would want to talk about these things and would probably want to visit these sort of places. So I can see it happening, and I can see him doing it without needing our advice or Robert's advice.
Auke says, why is Rutte one of Europe's extremist hawks? He brought Kolomoisky's billions stolen from the IMF to Amsterdam.
I would love to know the answer to that question myself. Bear in mind, I mean, there's an awful lot about this very interesting and rather complicated and in some ways, I think, rather sinister man that I don't myself know. I mean, he's been in politics now for a very long time. He's been one of the key leaders of the European Union. He sabotaged Merkel's attempt to set up a Russia-EU summit back in 2021, the last throw, basically, that Merkel made to try and keep something on, to hold something together. So he's a very powerful figure. Why he is what he is, what his background is and why he has this enormous power in the Netherlands, I simply don't know.
Liana says, spoke with Russian paratrooper and was amazed. Respect with which he spoke about NATO. He said, they are just doing their job, but we are ready for them. No fear, no anger, just incredible sense of duty to his nation. I was in awe.
Yeah, I think this is probably a reflection of the way Russians think. And can I just say, I mean, I read the Russian media regularly. I mean, obviously I read I read it in English. But, I can also sometimes check out Russian things. The thing I think you will find if you compare the way they write about us and the way we write and talk about them is that there's there was very little of the hysteria and anger about us that we seem to find everywhere about them. And I think this is absolutely true of the military, and it's true of civilian society. It's true at multiple levels. That's not to say that they're perfect. That's not to say that they don't come up with some, strange things from time to time. But overall, I think they do have this much more sort of calm, matter-of-fact approach to things than we have.
Jake says, the U.S. needs to reconcile with Russia. I think in exchange for Ukrainian neutrality, they should recognize Taiwan's independence and neutrality. How does that sound?
Not going to happen, I'm afraid. I mean, whatever you think of Ukraine, whatever you think of Taiwan, there is no conceivable way that the Russians will jeopardize their relationship with China by recognizing Taiwan. I mean, for one thing, they mistrust the US so much now that they will never make that kind of quid pro quo with the US, which would effectively mean throwing themselves fully into the US camp and against China, given that they would expect that sooner or later the US would just go back on whatever agreement with Russia it had made. So there's that isn't going to happen.
Tatiana Karmichel, thank you for that super sticker. Fridjof Sether, thank you for that super sticker. Margarita Dubrovina, thank you for that super sticker. Bauke says the investigation of Kolomoisky is a fake. John Helmer.
It's still an interesting event, and I mean, Helmer may be right. I still feel overall the very fact that that Kolomoisky is being investigated at all can't be comfortable or easy for Zelensky, given how identified with Kolomoisky Zelensky is. I mean, the fact that your former political patron, and not just political patron at every level, is under this kind of investigation, he's having his home searched and all of those sort of things, is something which will bring home to people the fact that Zelensky has been connected with this stratospherically corrupt individual who is now under investigation. So I don't think this is a good look for Zelensky, and it will weaken him.
Dark Matter Falls says, Alexander, what's your take on the latest Veritas expose with the Pfizer guy?
I haven't followed it at all, but what I've heard about it in vaguely or casually, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Robert, I should say, is the person to have asked that question of. I expect and anticipate many more revelations of coming out of that quarter. And one type of litigation, one litigation that I got the final end of was the tobacco litigation, which went on for years and years and years, in which people brought claims in the United States and Britain and elsewhere against the tobacco companies for providing them with misleading information. What is going to come is going to make that look like peanuts. That's what I basically think about it.
Where are we here? Lady Moreau says, many thanks to Duran team for inviting Robert Barnes again. It's always very interesting to listen to his analysis of American politics. Thanks for that. Mr. Fish says, we need war crime trials for the State Department criminals. Never going to happen.
I'm afraid you may be right. I think that to force war crimes trials upon the United States would be an impossible undertaking in any conceivable future reality. And I have to say that. I mean, that's the reality. That is the practical that's the practical result. The only way anything like that could happen is if in the United States themselves they decided at some point to start bringing action against these people, which is possible. It could happen.
Sunshin, thank you for that super sticker. Liana LK says, have missed your live shows while in Russia, but now back. And Alex, I still hope to make it to Cyprus to have that coffee. Last summer it didn't work out as I came down with that famous flu.
Oh, well. I look forward to your coffee, to the two of you, yeah. Coffee in Cyprus is very good, by the way.
Yes, it is. Ninnis Z says, what will the neocons of the U.S. and collective West do moving forward when washing machine Ukraine is destroyed once and for all?
That is the big question. We don't know. I mean, I simply don't know. My own personal view is that we already see the next war in preparation. I'm not sure where it's going to be, whether it'll be against Iran, where there was those interesting drone attacks, which we talked about last week, or whether it'll be the South China Sea or the Pacific. But anyway, they will move on to some other adventure. They always do.
Lilia says, is Arestovich being prepared to replace Zelensky?
No. I think he's gone so far off-piste. He's talking so critically now about the war that I don't think that he's acceptable either to the political class, such as it is in Ukraine, or to the collective West. To be frank, I strongly suspect he's going to end up somewhere in Russia before long. That's what I actually believe. Where else is he safe? He's going so far off-piste now that...
New 2 says, as may have seen, guys, battle of minds, money, and U.S. matters. Sergei Lavrov gives wide-ranging interview on Ukraine conflict. Key points.
Yes, he's done a brilliant interview. It's huge. He's been, by the way, he's been on fire recently. He also gave a massive press conference about 3 weeks ago. And it's all very, very revealing. And he reveals an awful lot about what's been going on and the internal backstory. And by the way, the interesting thing about Lavrov is he comes up with all these comments and discussions, tells us about what particular Western leaders got up to. Note that no one in the West ever comes out and says this isn't true.
Elza says, now Zelensky is asking for a spaceship, the Star Destroyer from Star Wars, and 300 T-300 Terminators. Biden has no plans to send the Star Destroyer.
Oh, of course. Very well said, actually.
Liana LK says, Russia update. Moscow was beautiful as ever, albeit quieter. Public opinion is predominantly supportive of the SMO, with rare exceptions. Only spoke with one in Moscow who cared only what this does to his lifestyle. Told him off.
Yeah. And bear in mind
that
Moscow is, of course, the city where if you're going to find liberal opinions expressed, you're most likely to find them. It's far and away the most liberal city in Russia.
Ninnis Z says, do you think Iraq will eventually join BRICS?
Long time in the future. I can't see it in any foreseeable reality. The country's much too disorganized. It's too divided. It's got far too many problems. It doesn't look like a BRICS candidate to me at the moment.
Christoph, thank you for that super chat. Ted says the Neocon version of an off-ramp is like someone suddenly cutting across all 4 traffic lanes with no turn signal to reach the exit, nearly killing everyone on the highway.
Brilliant. Thank you. I can't add to that. I think that's brilliant. Thank you.
From Ninnis Z, Mr. Barnes, do you see Biden being prosecuted?
Yes, I do. I'm not sure. I'm not saying it will happen. That's not a prediction. But I can see it happening, yes. After all, they themselves went around talking about the classified documents as, breachings of classifications being this monstrous crime when Trump had committed it. And the facts against Biden are, they look to me at least as bad, actually much worse. So, if it was a monstrous crime where Trump was concerned, it's a monstrous crime, presumably where Biden is concerned. But that's only a small thing. There's a lot of other things too. I can see it. I can imagine it happening. I'm not saying it will, but I can imagine it happening.
Ziknas says, excellent show, gents. Do you think that the global elite and the WEF will succeed with implementing the central bank digital currency? If yes, why? And if not, why not?
I think that that's not going to happen. Now, I don't know if anybody on this show has watched the discussion we had on the Duran, Glenn Deason and I, with Peter Schiff. But Peter Schiff said very clearly that project digital currency has gone. Global digital currency like that is over. I think Robert said something very similar, that the breakup of the world financial system that we are seeing happen now makes the introduction of that kind of global digital currency an impossibility.
Goblin Dust says, tip. Thank you for that, Goblin Dust. Liberty for Assange says, the US can manipulate the legal system in Sweden and the UK. Romania will be no problem.
So true.
At GEG says, Barnes, could you comment on the confluence of overclassification of documents and its effect on federal court cases that are routinely and increasingly cast out for national security interests?
I think that's an interesting question. I think what we'll do with that one, because it's definitely one for Robert, is we'll sort of keep it aside and perhaps ask him to comment on this on our next live stream with him, because he knows a lot more about this than we do. Certainly, I can say from my own casual reading of American cases that the way in which classification is used in the United States to obstruct the administration of justice is a real problem. But as I said, Robert is much better placed to discuss that than I am.
Martin, MDL, says, the U.S. has 1.3 million lawyers who make $500 per hour. Russia is outgunned 15-1 in lawyers. Remove the GDP produced by lawyers, and Russia has a higher GDP.
Interesting comment. I actually seem to remember reading somewhere that the US has more lawyers than all of the rest of the world combined. I'm sure that is not true, by the way, if you count China, India, and all the rest. But anyway, the United States does have an awful lot of lawyers. That I can certainly vouch for. And some of them, Robert, for example, are very good indeed. I have to say that also.
From Liberty for Assange, Julian Assange, the extreme example of someone who is not prepared to sell his principles for power, not prepared to sell his principles full stop.
Absolutely true. To the point, by the way, that it causes his lawyers, enormous problems. He's a very difficult person to represent in these proceedings, precisely because he sticks to his principles in the way that he does. So, for example, he is absolutely solid on never disclosing his sources, even when you could see, as over the course of some of the proceedings that have been brought against him, that it might have been to his advantage to do it.
Can't make out the name, but the super chat is, a plan and a storm, but you are connecting the dots, and you've worked out Trump not being indicted means something. Cleanest person, just maybe cooperating, but you guys are the best if everyone watched, and we'd already be out of the storm.
Well, thank you very much for those very kind words.
Rhodesian Dream says, should the Neocon succeed in driving the West into a direct war with Russia, would we not then have a moral obligation to stop them by any means necessary?
I hope we never get to that point. I really do, because it will be an absolute calamity. If we do find ourselves in that situation, well, many of us will have very difficult decisions to make. I don't want now to anticipate what those decisions might be.
VJ Cap says, at Robert Barnes, did you see the Viva stream with Konstantin Kisin? Oh my. We actually talked about that one. Thank you for that. Super chat. Kay Denza says, I've gotten a lot out of Jordan Peterson's psychology work, but he is so far off on geopolitics. He should have talked to the Duran on Ukraine instead of Kagan. Yeah,
well, I have to say this. I think that's perhaps a very fair point, actually. I mean, you do come across this where people are extremely well informed and are able to talk very well about something they are expert in, but are not good on other matters. And, it seems to me as if Peterson is one of those people.
At GEG says, it has long been my appraisal that the power mad, the woke, the totalitarian of all flavors are at the core suffering from a profound insecurity, an insecurity that manifests as motive to control others. I hope Peterson will see his current stance comes from a similar insecurity from being out of his element and perhaps a bad contract.
Well, I hope so too. But I mean, he will have to reach his own conclusions in time. But the fact that he's wrong about some things doesn't mean that he's wrong about other things. You can still listen to what he says about those other things that he's right about, or which we feel that he's right about, and take him seriously there. The fact that he's gone off on the deep end on some other things, well, he's human, and that's what humans do.
BFT Eyes Wide says, question to Robert, what is the hope for the USA in the near future? Seems there is no viable real powerhouses that could curb the deep state and warmongering neocons to the brink and bring the American aim of 1776 back.
Well, I think we've discussed this in not just this last program, but in other programs. I think the only thing one can say about this is, yes, these forces do exist that you talk about in the United States. The neocons are there. The deep state is indeed there. But there is still the Constitution. There's still the American people. They still have their own views, the American people, which are not those of the neocons. That, I think, has been validated by one opinion poll after another, one election after another. So the battle is not over. It is still being fought, and we must still go on fighting it, and fighting it in the way we're doing by talking about these things, speaking out, and others organising politically, bringing court cases, instructing people like Robert, doing those sort of things. So let's not despair. Let's not give way to counsels of despair. I have often said this, and I'm going to say it again. Despair is a very bad counsellor.
Win Kittle says, is it possible to explain how the US dollar became the reserve currency and what would happen if it was no longer used in international trading?
This is a colossal subject. I mean, you could talk about this sort of thing for at least 3 hours. I mean, basically, the reason the United States the dollar became the world's lead reserve currency was very simple. It's because the United States, by mid-20th century, was indisputably, by enormous measure, the most powerful and richest country in the world. People, I think, don't realize how rich and powerful relative to the rest of the world the United States was mid-century. I mean, I think it had something like 60% of world industrial production, even more of its GDP, about 3/4 of the world's gold reserves. I mean, it was, and of course, technologically, industrially, it was on a completely different planet from everywhere else. I can remember as a child and as a teenager, people from Europe who traveled to the United States in circa 1950. And, they told me how when they went there then, it was like they'd been in a completely different civilization. It was so far in advance at that time, in every respect, over everyone else, that, you could barely make comparisons. So it is not surprising, given how powerful and how rich it was, that the dollar became the major currency. The US dominated world trade. It dominated the world economy. It was indisputably the most powerful country. There was also the sense that people needed the protection of the United States because of the challenges first from the Germans and then from the Soviets. So that inclined the US people even more to side with the US. And as I said, in the 1940s and 1950s, it's unsurprising that the dollar became the major internationally traded currency. And then, of course, things changed and they became eroded over time because operating a reserve currency, as I've discussed many times, ultimately has weakened the US. It hasn't strengthened it. And in the 1970s, the US could no longer support the dollar as a reserve currency through its gold reserves, through its exports. So they linked it up with oil. Again, we've discussed this. Go to this program we did with Peter Schiff. We discussed it at length there. And that has created a sort of second period of time in which the dollar has operated as the reserve currency. And it's continued to be a problem for the US. I believe when that ceases to be so for the US after a period of turbulence, it will be a liberating experience. When the dollar ceases to be a global currency and becomes once again the currency of the United States alone, and the Federal Reserve ceases to be the world central bank, but becomes again the central bank of the United States, assuming, of course, that the United States even needs a central bank. Many people say it doesn't. I'm not going to go there. Then all the latent strengths of the United States, in my opinion, will come back into play. But yes, this is a titanic subject. Answering it all in that way, it doesn't go, it just scratches the surface.
All right, those are all the questions from the live stream with Robert Barnes. Thank you, everybody. Take care.